Not only does Yonder Alonso think the Royals are going to bounce back in 2024, he's actually got them winning the division.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Also, you can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Be sure to give us a review if you're listening on podcasts like Spotify and Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, all of those outlets. Give us a review. Let us know how we're doing. Leave a comment if you want us to talk about more things, if you want us to improve on more things, or if you just want to, praise the podcast. We welcome all of that on those different types of platforms. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. Very important and a good sponsor for our shows throughout this week. Again, we won't have a show on Friday. Still going to do a mailbag segment on my Twitter account. So if you got questions, I'll just be sure to put that tweet out on Thursday night, probably is when I'm going to do it, and answer those questions on Friday morning. But with PrizePicks, we've got a lot in the next 2 days to go over with that. So stay tuned throughout this 30-minute podcast episode. For our new listeners, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. If you want to know a little bit more about me, I work in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Got a show once a week over there and a show Monday through Friday on ESPN Kansas City. So if you ever want my thoughts on things that may not pertain to Major League Baseball or the Royals, you can catch me over there. But you know when you click on this podcast link by now that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Again, questions and comments always welcome on the YouTube page or again on my Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Well, I intended to talk about this the other day, but I wanted to get that Nick Prado segment in. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that podcast. But I wanted to go over what Yonder Alonso, former Oakland A, former Chicago White Sox, former Cleveland Guardian, Cleveland Indian at the time, that really caught my attention. I think for Royals fans, really caught their attention well. And we understand that there is a fine line between wishful thinking and actual reasons to give hope, right? I think every team has optimism. They've got their wishful thinking. Even teams like Colorado, even teams like Oakland, there are fans out there that are going to be optimistic, as it should be. It's a fresh start. Everybody's 0-0. Only one team's going to win the World Series, but you can still be optimistic about your team. But whereas last year, the optimism was more so, hey, I can't wait to see these young guys play. This year, it's these guys can be pretty good. And that's not just me talking. That's not just Royals fans boasting their team. This has now been said a few times over on MLB Network about the Royals not just being good, but winning this damn division, winning the American League Central. Now, I understand a lot has to go right. That is a stretch for this team to go from 103 losses to a playoff berth. But don't act like it's the most outlandish thing that you've ever seen. You do not have to go that far back in the American League Central to find a team that went from 103 losses to a playoff berth. It was the 2016 Twins. The 2016 Twins were awful. Awful rotation. Awful bullpen. Lost 103. Then they won, I believe, 85 or 86 games in 2017. Went to the wild card, lost to the Yankees in the Bronx. But you talk about a turnaround. I mean, nearly 30-game improvement. So don't act like it's outlandish for a turnaround to happen. I get different circumstances, and the Minnesota Twins all of a sudden just had this unbelievable offense in 2017. I mean, every guy 1 through 9 had an on-base percentage north of 300. That likely is not going to happen in Kansas City where the offense is that good, but one can dream. I think the Royals are going to try to win their games with their rotation and their bullpen. But see, this is where I think it's actually a good thing because I have teetered back and forth a few times on if a team that is coming off 106 losses, not 103, so that is a little bit of the difference there. You have a team that lost 100 plus is what I should have said. But the Royals coming off 106 losses should not be seen or viewed as this team that, is a World Series contender or an American League contender. That I stand by. I fully stand by the fact that you should not be taking that and running with it, of Yonder Alonso or anybody at MLB Network saying this team is going to be a playoff team. You can take that as, hey, just get your foot in the door. If you get your foot in the door, you can have some fun in October. But step one, as John Sherman said way back, he doesn't want to see what a World Series team looks like. He wants to see what a wild card team looks like, a team that can just get in first. Then you build off that, of course. But I look at this team, I look at this roster, and I think it is a great thing that they have been giving expectation like that, because you have people that are buying into what they're doing. And for one, it gives a lot of hope and optimism to this fan base, some that they have not had in quite some time. And that to me is vitally important when building a winner. You got to get people to believe you're actually doing this, and not just hearing GM speak, owners speak, coaches speak with, oh, we feel really good about our chances. We feel like we can compete. We like the guys we have here. Everybody's going to say that. But you start hearing it from people outside the organization, that's when things get different. That's when things become believable. And with that Minnesota team losing 103, 3 less games than the Royals. So it wasn't that big of a jump, right? 103 to 106. That's pretty much comparable. You lose over 100, you're not a good baseball team. And you can fix things like that. You can turn things over and think back to then. And Minnesota was dealing with a good division. Cleveland, Kansas City were still competing at the top half of that division. Now, the Tigers were in rebuild mode. The White Sox were still in rebuild mode, but Kansas City still had their core intact, and Cleveland was coming off an American League pennant. And Minnesota found a way to compete in that division. Now they've expanded the playoffs to have wild card series, and you kind of feel like, man, if things go right, a lot has to go right, but if things go right, you can see what Yonder Alonso's saying, which was this team can win the division the last week of the season. Now, my money is still on Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota's giving you reason with their bullpen, their rotation, that they are going to be the reigning American League champs. They should be the favorite. But you got to take some stock into what some out there are saying, whether that it is just an analyst, whether it's a former player like Alonso. I mean, he didn't have to say something like that. He could have gone to camp and said, hey, they look really good. They're going to be better this year. That would have been the easiest thing to say. But the fact he went one step further and thinks there's a lot of winning culture here, or it feels like it, and they're going to win this division the last week of the regular season. Hey, Royals fans can be pessimistic and say, now I'm just going to be let down. This team's going to suck. They're going to lose 100. Take it for what it is. It's a prediction. Predictions don't get you far. You got to do something with those predictions. And I think more than anything, these players want the respect. They feel like they are a team that's good enough right now. And maybe they will thrive on people giving them expectation. Maybe they'll crumble. But we are now seeing a lot of people believing in what Kansas City has done. And we experienced a lot of years where they were written off, that you couldn't get the MLB Network crew out of Surprise faster or away from their practice facility or their, barn that they would go take batting practice, and you couldn't get them out of there fast enough because there wasn't anything to talk about. It was a team that was going nowhere. They were going to lose 90 plus, 100 plus. There's a different feel this year. There's a different level of respect to the Kansas City Royals. And for fans, that should be exciting. Seeing this team turn around, it sounds monumental of losing 106 to winning this division. But there are things that can go right and piece it together where they have a chance. Again, Alonso's not saying they're going to run away with it. This is a 9 team. He expects the second week and the Royals to take advantage of a weak Central. Health, of course, is going to be a big part of that. Your stars performing at star levels is going to be a big part of that. The bullpen being stable. And Michael Wacha, Seth Lugo, Cole Reagans, and Brady Singer anchoring down that rotation. And you're going to need Melendez and Isbell, Amassey to step up. We've gone over this time and time and again. We know what it takes. We know what's going to have to go right. But it's good to hear at least that from all the moves they made, from how they've fared, how they've looked in spring training so far, take it with a grain of salt, there's people that are believing in them and people that don't need to believe in them. Yonder Alonso didn't play for the Royals. It's one thing, this is a former Royal coming down there and saying, yeah, they're going to be really good. This is a playoff team. Yonder Alonso has no ties to Kansas City. He's working for MLB Network. He's going around and checking out different teams, and he's prediction in. He's got the Royals winning the American League Central in the last week of the regular season. Do you believe Yonder Alonso? Are you going to go with this pick, or are you still going to be a pessimist and think, not this year? It's not going to happen. It's not going to come close to happening. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube, or let me know in the Twitter comments below at JohnnyJ_15. We'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, a guy the Royals were definitely interested in, maybe missing the entire year in Boston. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to our title sponsor today in PrizePicks. Though football season may be over, the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of the year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into some serious cash. Because right now, you can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks, only 4, and you can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 sports app. I know I said today, do not use before March 6th, so that will be after tomorrow, so look to use that on Thursday, of course. So here's exactly what you need to go do. Go and download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB, that's LOCKEDONMLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. So good stuff over there at PrizePicks. Well, we found out yesterday that Lucas Giolito is in danger of missing all of 2024. Right now, the early indication is that he's got a partially torn UCL and a flexor strain. Not looking too good for the right-hander who just signed a $38.5 million deal with the Boston Red Sox this offseason. And you may be wondering, why are you bringing this up? Why are we talking about Lucas Giolito on a Royals podcast? Well, if you can go back to the beginning of this offseason in December, we discussed Lucas Giolito in length. I think there were 4 legitimate starters the Royals were in on. I think there were 4 guys that they had talked to in length and had tried to work a deal out with. One, obviously, was Seth Lugo. I think Lugo was near the top of their list. Of course, they tried to get him last year. It didn't work out. Then they went for him again. Number 2, Michael Wacha, self-explanatory. I think they really wanted Wacha. Marcus Stroman was another guy I think they really wanted, but then when his price was being driven down, was always going to go elsewhere, which he did, and he ended up in the Bronx with the Yankees. The 4th guy was Lucas Giolito. I didn't think Giolito had the most smoke to Kansas City, but he was an option. The Royals were willing to spend that money. They had a lot of familiarity with him when he was in Chicago. They'd really liked what they had seen. He didn't have a great finish to the year in 2023, but was always going to make pretty big money, close to $20 million, which is what he nearly got in Boston. But then spring training happens, and I'm not going to say the Royals stayed away from him because they were fearful of this. Spring training's random. Injuries are random in spring training. We're not really going to be tied down to, a perfect, healthy mentality. Like, that's just what I mean by that is you can't be married to the idea of going into spring training and everybody's healthy. Somebody's going to get hurt. I mean, the Royals have already dealt with 3 minor injuries to guys that were going to be on their opening day roster. It appears Jordan Lyles is going to be just fine, but They're slowly having to work in Carlos Hernandez and John McMillan, both guys in their bullpen. So you're dealing with, minor forms of injuries. Fortunately for the Royals, aside from Christian Chamberlain, they've avoided that disastrous injury to a starter on their. It's happened to them before. It's happened to many teams in baseball. And for Boston, Giolito is the one that gets the worst of it with that partially torn UCL. At least, that's what was reported the other day. And then you look at the flexor strain as well. It's not good for Lucas Giolito. And why I wanted to talk about it is the Royals took a very specific approach this offseason. And I think it is important to bring up again. No, they did not Lucas Giolito, but also no, they're not sitting there feeling like they dodged a bullet. It's all randomness, of course, I just brought up. But the Royals wanted to invest in quantity over quality, I feel like. I think that Giolito and Marcus Stroman were the high-end guys. Clearly, with the money they got, they were more high-end than Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo. But they also understood the fact that if you spend 20 to 25 million on Stroman or Giolito, it may mean you can't reach the price or the asking price of Wacha and Lugo. They wanted to get two guys in this free agent quest for starting pitching, and they wanted to make sure that they can assemble a rotation that's got a lot of depth to it. I don't think there's much depth behind those guys, but you look 1 through 5 right now, it's a formidable rotation. I mean, the crazy look to last year, the Royals have 3 guys, or had 3 guys, that are not even on a major league roster right now. Greinke, Keller, and Bubic. I should say active roster because, of course, Chris Bubic is on the 60-day IL. Remember, Daniel Lynch got hurt in spring training, so Bubic was forced into that role. Singer and Lyles are the only returning guys, and they're 4s and 5s in this rotation. So they wanted the quantity because they needed quantity. These are still good arms. I mean, Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo, they deserve their money. They deserve their praise. But imagine it this way. If the Royals had gone after Giolito and signed him to the exact same deal that the Boston Red Sox did, and this happened, where do you turn to? You have Cole Reagans, you have Singer, you have Lyles. Now you're forcing 2 guys into your rotation. I mean, Giolito would have been this team's number 1. He would have been paid like a number 1. He was young enough. He had been, a frontline starter. And even if it was in Chicago, I mean, the White Sox were a playoff team when Giolito was there, at least for a handful of years. So you look if the Royals did that move, Stroman or Giolito, and they got hurt. It's the danger of it. Right now, the Royals can afford, not that anybody wants that. I mean, again, I'm going to knock on wood for that. But they have a little bit of flexibility where Reagans and Wacha could be there if Lugo misses a few starts. If you lost the one guy you signed and spent a lot of money on, it just is a gut punch. It takes the wind out of your sails for opening day. I know for Boston right now, it is a horrific outcome. They have to trade Chris Sale. I shouldn't say have to. They decided to trade Chris Sale. They signed Giolito. Giolito gets hurt. I mean, they had somewhat of a rotation, and now it's kind of crumbling in front of them. And that's something you're wanting to avoid if you're Kansas City, of course, because I don't believe there is fantastic depth there. There are guys that have gotten you starts. There are guys that have given you innings, but not at an effective level. Like, there were people at the Jordan Lyles injury yesterday going, well, now you can start Lynch, or now you can go out there and sign somebody else. Even though Lyles wasn't great last year, losing one of your starters in spring training is not good, whether they're good or they're bad, because it already starting you into your depth category. You got to force somebody else. You got to force the second stringer into that spot. And if he goes down, now you're on to your third option. So even if the guy's not good, you want to go into the season healthy in that regard, because then you can see how he does. If it's not well, you can pivot to option number 2. You don't want to be forced into option 2 or 3 or 4 in spring trading. Right now for Boston, that's the unfortunate reality for them. Kansas City, I'm not going to say because injuries are random. I feel gutted for Giolito. I feel gutted for Boston. Signing a guy to a $38.5 million contract, and he may not even pitch in 2024. I mean, that's tough stuff. That's really brutal stuff for a team that was trying at least to compete a little bit in the American League East. But for the Royals, aside from Lyles having a little bit of back tightness, the rotation through this amount of games has been set, has been healthy, and you're hoping you can carry that into the regular season. Before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. When we return, I want to go over this infield and how good I think the defense can be. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to one of the sponsors today in eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. So I got asked this on YouTube the other day about this infield, how good they can be, and more of an in-depth dive on Maikel Garcia over at third base. Well, I can tell you this with my opinion, my transparency here. I think the Royals defensively have one of, if not the best left sides in the American League. A lot of people are going to believe that right now. Some people are going to refute that because they maybe haven't heard enough about Maikel Garcia yet. But this was one of the guys who was saving a ton of runs over at the hot corner, and he didn't even go into the regular season last year playing that position. So now you have another year under your belt, a winter league performance that was off the charts, and Maikel Garcia gets to return to third base alongside one of the best shortstops in all of baseball. So on the surface, I just go to that side and say, even if they had an Omar Infante type at second base, or they had a Billy Butler type at first base, guys that just were not known for their defense on the right side, it would still be a really good defensive infield because of what you were putting out there on the left side. Fortunately for the Royals, and fortunately for their pitching staff, 3 of their 4 are above average defenders. Michael Massey is no slouch over at second base. I mean, he is very much a positive defender in that category. What it's going to come down to is what Vinny Pasquantino can give you. He's never really had that chance to man first base for an entire year. Now, he's got a great coach to work with in Jose Aguasil, who is very much credited in making Bobby Witt Jr. the guy that he was at shortstop, defensively, I should say. Maikel Garcia making that transition easier, Michael Massey's improvement, even Salvador Perez having to play first base and getting a little bit better at it. So Vinny Pasquantino's got the right guy. He's got the right coach to make him a good first baseman. But I think you can sit back and dream a little bit and say, this could be one of, if not the best defensive infields in baseball. There's a lot of speed over there. You're not going to have too many mistakes on the left side. You're going to have an incredible up-the-middle duo with your middle infield. And then at first base, if Vinny Pasquantino can just be average, I mean, not many teams can say 3 of their 4 infielders are well above average in that category. Now, if you want to factor in catching, because it is an infield technical position, Salvador Perez will bring that down a little bit, even with his multiple gold gloves, just analytically in terms of pitch framing and, saving runs behind the plate. He's not one of the best, I would say. But in terms of just infielders, which I'm sure is what this YouTuber or this listener and follower was commenting on YouTube, it's a group that can be really good. Really, really good. And I think that goes unnoticed a little bit. Sometimes you take for granted great infield defense. If a pitcher's rolling, you just kind of focus on the pitcher. You're like, he's serving it up well. He's serving up ground balls. There's double plays. He's throwing strikes. You feel good about it, right? Well, I think in baseball, there's only certain positions that you really notice how good they can be. Shortstop's one of them. The Royals have one of the best in baseball. Center field's another. Kyle Isbell's one of the better defensive center fielders in the American League. So those are two spots you absolutely notice it. Where you may not notice it as much is first base, third base, second base, right field. When you have a guy that excels there, then it really starts to be noticed because you look at maybe some of the balls that a below average guy couldn't get to. I mean, for third base, for example, Maikel Garcia could be one of the best defensive third basemen they've had in 2 decades, I would say. He's going to rival at least top 3. Not because he's over the top so unbelievably good. I think he's a very good defender. The Royals did not value third base defense. Hunter Dozier was atrocious. Maikel Franco was atrocious. Mike Moustakas was below average, didn't have the most range, but we all, of course, love Mike Moustakas. But Garcia can take you to a level of that is a transcendent talent over there. And if the bat comes around, now you look at just all-around player-wise, the Royals have one of the better left sides in all of baseball. Now, that's if all of it goes well. But to me, when you've got that great defense at third, you can have good defense at first, corner outfield spots. That's when it elevates your entire defense to, wow, this is a really good group. If you shine at shortstop and center field, as the Royals do, feel good about it. But if you have a really good second baseman, now it doesn't have to just be fielding the routine plays. It's making the extra effort plays, the diving stops, the balls that have expected batting averages of like 860. Having that range, having that athleticism, having the arm strength when you're making a diving play in the hole or up the middle or down the line, and you have the arm strength to get it over there. When it's a slow roller, can you charge in and barehand it and flip it to first? How accurate are you? All of these things factor in. Royals right now, infield-wise, cannot complain. I think that is a very solid and good defensive infield. Outfield, they excel at one spot, and that's center field. Melendez is well below average in left. You're hoping he can improve that. And Hunter Renfroe is not that great of a fielder in right, but he's got a cannon for an arm. So Melendez and Renfroe, same fielder, but shine at the same things and lack in the same things. Now, Renfroe and Melendez are 95th and up percentile in arm strength. They've got rockets for arms. But range and, being an all-around outfielder of saving runs and getting to the uncatchable balls, that they struggle a little bit. So that's where this defense can transform if those guys can just be average. Because right now, they got it locked down at a lot of spots in the infield with Maikel Garcia, Bobby Witt Jr., and Michael Massey. But good question from that listener on YouTube. Wanted to make sure I hit on that before I closed out today's show. But that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me that follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15 and find us on wherever you get your podcast. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to wrap up our final episode of the week, go over that game between the Cubs and the Royals, of course, and maybe a little bit more of what happened in Thursday's game as well, and an injury update on the Kansas City Royals. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.